and it was an ex-boyfriend. He came over to my house, and I was sitting on the couch. I was just reading a book with candles, a bottle of Sauza tequila sitting there. I was just sipping on tequila like a normal person, you know? And he was like, "What happened to you to drink like this?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Who drinks tequila on a Tuesday night, like while reading a book? Like that is not normal." And I just will never forget the crippling shame I felt in that moment. It was like this feeling like I had been caught or seen. Like I just felt so naked, and that kind of was the beginning of me hiding my drinking.
I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. It's hard to get serious for this podcast, Steve, when your 10-year-old is in the corner and doing her little twerking thing. She likes to go and twerk her ass in front of me. That's her little thing. She's learned how to twerk. Sweetest girl on the planet. Well, Steve, I'm excited. We've got a guest tonight, and I always like it when we can do something for our female listeners, because I think in alcoholism, addiction, not enough is done for women. If you go to a 12-step meeting, these things are dominated by men. Our meeting we went to last night, somebody said, "Hey, is this a men's meeting?" No. It's just the women don't come. So we have Laura on as our guest. You know her as your sober pal on Instagram, where she is incredibly vulnerable. I found Laura on both the Sober Motivation podcast, and I first found her on Jill Tietz's Sober Powered podcast, and she's got an incredible message. Laura, thanks for coming on the Sober Friends podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Before you get into your story, I'm curious, when you first got sober, would you have considered yourself to have a low bottom story, or would you have considered yourself to be more high bottom?
It could have been a higher bottom, but I let that bottom get pretty low. So I would say like mid to low bottom.
I would have assumed you would have considered yourself more high bottom based
I think a lot
on...
of people think that I'm a high bottom. But yeah, no, I've had some bad bottoms.
I don't think you are, but I don't think you ended up in the gutter. So that was my way of saying I was a high bottom person. And when we get into your story, the thing that I can identify the most is it was, to me, it seemed like it was more of the issues of the mind, of the mental torture more than anything else. And that's what I could identify hearing your story. Why don't you start wherever you want to? How did you get to this point? How did you join our wonderful club, Laura?
Well, as you kind of alluded to before the podcast, I want to not get too stuck in the mess and focus on the message. You know, I feel like you don't think it's going to happen to you, right? And I saw it in my family, and I thought, well, that's not going to be me. And I thought I was immune to it. And so, I went into college like every other college student, thinking I'm going to party and do what college students do. And, growing up, I was really insecure, and I lacked confidence. And so when I discovered alcohol, I thought it was like the key to the world. It gave me confidence. It made me feel easy in my own skin. And I felt really good. What can I say?
You could be who you really weren't. That's how it felt for me.
Yes, totally. And it feels good. Like, what can I say? I like things that feel good. Like, even sober. So
Don't we all?
I know, right? And I'm like, I think that's why so many of us people chase food and other things when we get sober. But yeah, and so went to college, drank, partied, had a blast. After that, I moved to a ski town, and anybody who's lived in a ski town knows it's like college 2.0, you know what I'm saying? And so everybody's a Peter Pan. And again, drinking and partying is normalized, like just the same way it is in college. And like, I didn't, and the thing is, when you're surrounded by people who are behaving the same way as you don't think twice about what you're doing.
That is one of the things I can identify most with your story when I've heard it a couple times, because I have to tell you, I didn't have a problem because the people I hung around with drank a lot worse than me. And so it was so easy to point at them of, I can't be an alcoholic. Look at how that asshole drinks. And I don't drink that way. So I'm fine. And it is great to compare and be around people worse than you.
And it's so easy to find somebody who makes you
Right.
feel better about the way you drink, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm fond of saying that everybody I hung out with drank like me, or at least I thought they did. Because if they didn't, I didn't hang out with them anyway. So yeah, I would move on to people who continued to drink like me.
Right? And then you saw people who maybe weren't drinking as much as you, and you were like, that person's really weird. And so, or you
Yeah.
automatically assume they judge you,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know? So, yeah, I mean, that's how it was in the ski town. And so I partied pretty hard. And I don't think it was until I was in my mid to late 20s that the first until someone actually pointed out my drinking to me. And it was an ex-boyfriend. He came over to my house and I was sitting on the couch. I was just reading a book with candles, a bottle of Sauza tequila sitting there. I was just sipping on tequila like a normal person, you know? And he was like, "What happened to you to drink like this?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Who drinks tequila on a Tuesday night, like while reading a book? Like that is not normal." And I just will never forget the crippling shame I felt in that moment. It was like this feeling like I had been caught or seen. Like I just felt so naked. And that kind of was the beginning of me hiding my drinking because I didn't believe I had a problem, but I didn't need anybody else like having an opinion on the way I drink.
Isn't that just the opposite of the way you should think? Somebody calls you out and says, maybe your drinking is troublesome. So instead of doing something about it, they better not see me doing it anymore so I don't hear about it.
Right? It's literal insanity.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a standard move for some of us. I did exactly the same thing. Like I said, I never wanted to see anybody to see the way I drank. Like I would drink totally different in front of you than once you weren't around.
Yeah.
So, and shame was a huge part of it for me too. I really identify with that from an early age. That shame, it's such a strong feeling, And
It's so strong.
once you get it, alcohol took that away from me. Sometimes it made me more shameful, right? Just like you said, I had a lot of shame, and then I would drink, and it would make me feel better until afterwards, and I was like, "Oh, I did it again,"
Yeah. I mean, alcohol at the end of the day really exacerbates shame.
Yeah.
But it's just like that chicken egg situation where you're like you drink to mask the shame, but then it's there tenfold when the booze wears off, and
Right.
it's such a hamster wheel that I do not miss. But yeah, I mean, I started hiding my drinking, and I started noticing like that little things. Like I had a roommate; she was part of a wine club. She get these like fancy wines from Napa and stuff. And I remember like I would have the urge so strong that I would end up like caving and then cracking open one of her like special bottles from Napa. But then I'd realize I couldn't replace it because I couldn't just go to the store and replace the alcohol. And then she'd be like, "Where's all my wine at?" And I remember being like, "What the hell? Why can't you just not drink her wine? Like, what is wrong with you?" And I think I was starting to notice that even when I swore I wouldn't drink, I would drink. And I didn't like that. It didn't feel good to not be in control. And so, yeah, I started doing the whole like 30-day, I would do like, I'm not going to drink this week. I'm going to take a week off and kind of do these like little dry stints thinking it could come back and be able to control it. Because, if you take a break, that means that you don't have a problem, right?
I looked on Yahoo once, a long time ago when Yahoo was a thing, and I read about quitting drinking or dialing back. And there was some article that said, if you can not drink for something like 90 days or so, it will relieve your problems. Or it said something along the lines, or I read it in such a way that if you stop drinking for a while, you won't drink as much when you come back. Now, I don't know if that was the reality, but that's how I took it. And it was on Yahoo. So it must be true.
Wow. I cannot believe there's something out there that actually says that.
That was also 20 years ago. So
I mean, do you mean like it was on Yahoo, the website, or written by a Yahoo?
no, it was written on the Yahoo
Right.
website.
Both.
Probably.
Oh, wow. I mean, yeah, I'm convinced that all of us have gone through a round of that where we thought we could, if we took a break, we
Yep.
would be able to control it. I mean, I literally have friends in my life right now who are like, I'm taking a break so that I can like get my drinking in control. And I'm like, oh,
Right.
I remember that. Oh,
Right.
memories. You know, and it's not my place to tell someone they have a drinking problem.
Right.
Let people learn. So for some of us, it's going to take what it takes. And for me, I had to prove to myself I had a problem. I was not like going to be like, oh, my life is a little uncomfortable. Drinking's hurting, is like pulling me back in these ways. So I'm done. Like it really got beaten into me. And that's what I mean when you asked about the low bottom and the high bottom. Like I could have stopped drinking at this point. It was clearly not working for me. I was already like not happy with the way I was drinking. I was starting to realize it was holding me back, but I just wanted to control it. I wanted to get under control. I wanted to still be able to hang out and party, just not feel like the pull toward the bottle every single day. And so I was determined to figure out a way to control or relieve that craving. So went that merry-go-round of quitting and starting back up. And I ended up getting a DUI during this time. I got an extreme DUI, blew a .21, and that was horrendous. And the
You're
shame,
lucky to be alive. Like
huh?
you're lucky to be alive. When you're in that ballpark range, you've got lighter fluid in your body.
Literal lighter fluid.
Yeah.
And you know what? He had me like walk the line and stuff, and I did pretty good. And then I blew it to the breathalyzer, and he's like, "Oh my god, you are way too lucid to have this high of blood alcohol content." Kind of alluding to the fact like you have a problem, lady. Like you're not. Yeah. So it was awful.
The
And I
guy
was
who sees this every day.
literally in Tahoe, where everybody's getting they like the motto of Tahoe is you're not a local unless you have a dog, a divorce, and a DUI. So I went to the drunk tank and I was like, I'm done drinking. So got out of the drunk tank. I think I stayed sober for like 60 days. And then of course by 60 days, all that shame, all that stuff like starts to wear off. You forget, you start
You're
missing
cured.
alcohol. You're cured, but you also like forget about the pain, right? And so it's like you see all your friends having fun and you're like, you know what? I'm sure it'll be fine. I learned my lesson. I got a DUI. And so yeah, I went back out and then it was like right back where I started. And I don't know, I swear, like some people think they can quit and come back and control it. I think you come back worse. Like I really do. And I came back and it was like like you kind of can control it maybe for like a week or two. And then it's like a slippery slope and you're right back where you started. And it was just consequence after consequence after a while. And at one point, I woke up out of a blackout in Whole Foods, like after driving drunk all day, after I already had a DUI on my record. Like, and it was just the worst. First of all, like, who goes to Whole Foods in a blackout? Like, this girl. Like, what is that? I was literally hovering over the food buffet, so we all know where my mind was at.
Yeah, everybody knows that the low bottom alcoholics end up in a blackout in Aldi, not at Whole Foods.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean I like my friends and I laugh about it every time we see a Whole Foods now. But that day I was like, oh my God. And that was the first day I was like, I just remember being so scared. That I would never, this was going to be my future. And I was like, how did I get here? Like, how did I get here? I went to like a good college. Like I had a decent upbringing, this and that. You start thinking of all the reasons like why you shouldn't be the girl who wakes up out of a blackout at a grocery store, and locks her keys in the car. And that was kind of a turning point for me. I decided to finally get help because at this point I had already tried to quit this and that, declaring I'd never drink again, then drinking again. I was on the wagon, I was off the wagon. And I'm like, I need help. Like, I just need help. And I knew that I did. I couldn't do it on my own. I tried books, I tried podcasts, I tried all the things. And not to say that they didn't help, they certainly did. And I do think they led me to being willing to get help. But I had to go into a real meeting and talk to like real life people and get like one-on-one mentorship with a sponsor to finally get this thing. And that really I consider to be the beginning of my recovery journey. I did have another really big relapse after I walked to my first meeting. And that relapse, I mean, I had 7 months sober, and I was working really hard on my sobriety during that 7 months. Then my friend took her life, and I relapsed at her memorial, and I woke up out of a blackout in the hospital. In the hospital.
Wow.
So I was like, I went right back out and worse than ever. Obviously, I had a lot of grief, so I think that's why I just drank myself into oblivion. But like, I remember being like, "Woof, I'm an alcoholic! Holy cow!" And I have to say, like, I said this on Sober Motivation, but it was like a big weight off my chest the day I admitted to myself that I was an alcoholic, that I had a drinking problem or whatever. And like, I know a lot of people have an issue with the word alcoholic, but for me, like, for me to just say, like, I'm an alcoholic. Like, to me, an alcoholic is someone who, like, they crave alcohol. When they have some, they crave more. Like, and that was going to be me no matter what. And I knew that. And I was like, just to admit it was like a piano getting lifted off my chest. It felt so good. Like,
Laura, I totally agree with you. I understand that people identify the way they're going to identify. But for me, the term alcoholic is not stigmatic. To me, it is freeing. It's freeing the same way. When I say I'm an alcoholic, I know exactly why I have this problem. And it answers all my questions just saying I'm an alcoholic. All the questions I had about why am I so fucked up, that answers it and makes me feel better. I don't have a problem identifying that way. However you want to identify, alcohol-free, sober-curious, that's on you. I just don't think it's that big of a deal to use that word. And I like to use that old-fashioned alcoholic word because of what it does connotate. I wasn't in the gutter yet, but if I don't do this podcast and go to meetings and connect with guys like Steve, I'm going to end up in the gutter. Maybe not tomorrow, but it'll happen.
No question about it. I always talk about in my story is that the breakthrough for me was, and I've told this many times, is I had a relapse. I had 14 years. And again, I convinced myself I could drink again. And we know that story. And my story is I picked up in October at a sales meeting. By December, I was drinking alone in my basement again, right? That's how quickly it turned, right? From October to December. And I don't even remember drinking those first couple of weeks I got back from that business trip. But the breakthrough for me was when I had a panic attack. And it's just like you when you woke up and said, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. And I had a panic attack and we had a big party at the house. And my wife's not an alcoholic and she drinks wine. And I opened up the fridge and she had 2 bottles of wine in there. And I had this panic attack. I was about 2 weeks newly sober, right? This was after my relapse, after I came back. And I had this thought in my head. I went into the bedroom and I called a couple people and my wife came in and said, what's going on? And I said these words to her. I said, I'm an alcoholic and I don't know how to fix it. That was when I finally realized, like, I don't know how to fix this. Just like you said, like, I need help. I need somebody to show me how I fix this problem that I have. And, once I did that, it wasn't fun after that. But there was a relief. Like, something? Now I can get to work. Now I can do what I need to do. And now I can try to fix this the best I can. But it is a freeing thing. So
it was so liberating. And, and I agree with you. Like, you can call yourself for whatever you want to call yourself. Yeah. For me, it was cathartic, really. And just like when people are so relieved to get a diagnosis from like a doctor, like that's kind of what it was. And yeah, it's like you can finally move forward, right? And it's, to me, also like honest with yourself too, like, because I was like in freaking denial for so long. Like, so yeah, I mean, I went to my first meeting. The meeting was so like awkward and weird because like they locked the key out, like they forgot the key, so we had to have it in the sidewalk in front of the building, and all this like funny stuff was happening. And I remember being like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed, like someone's gonna see me here. But I remember just finding so like that, seeing like hearing people share their stories, like it was blowing my mind because in this meeting, I just remember being like so taken aback by how raw and vulnerable and real people were. Like people were just talking about like the deepest shit. And then in the same breath, like laughing and just like you could just see the joy in their lives. And like, I don't know, for me, it just felt like so jarring because I was so used to like, I guess the fakeness that I was constantly encountering in the real world. And people are always pretending like everything's perfect. And you know how social media is. And then to go to a meeting where people are like, oh my God, like this is like how I'm struggling, or like this is where I'm at in my recovery, and just being so raw and vulnerable was just so beautiful. It really like stunned me, honestly. And even though that meeting was super like weird with like the key getting locked, like the forgetting the key, and it was like everything went wrong technically, it was just so magical. And I just kept coming back because I was like, I just saw, I wanted what these people had. I wanted what these people had. And they were like, they'd come from like the bottom of the bottom, lowest of the low, to being able to just support each other and laugh and find joy in their lives. And also, the other thing that really stunned me was I really liked hearing people like share about how great their lives were. And like, you know, a lot of people would be like, oh, I got new jobs and cars and I have a new family and all this cool stuff in their life. But when I heard people's stories about like going through tremendous grief or going through like really big trials and tribulations, and then they were still staying sober and moving through this like difficult times, the difficult phases of their life with such grace, that really blew me away too. I remember in early recovery because at this time, like, I swear someone would look at me wrong and I would drink over it. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
drank over everything, or I got a craving at least over everything. To me, I remember being like, I want that. I want to be someone who can go through like really hard times in life and like not need to drink over it. And that really inspired me too in early recovery.
I had this. There's this guy at one of the meetings I go to, that he's something like 40 years sober, and he shares all the time. My first 5 years of sobriety, my mother died, my father died, I got a divorce, and then in my last 5 years of sobriety, two daughters committed suicide. I fell off my motorcycle. I cracked my head open. I ended up in the hospital, and I never drank over it. And he has had some horrifying stuff happen in his life in sobriety, and he continued staying sober. And when I hear that message, the first thing is why, if I'm brand new? And the second thing is, what is it that you have now that's not pushing you over, that would push lesser people? There's something that you now have that replaces alcohol, that is something that you can cope with. And if Tony can do it, anybody can do it.
It's so cool. And, you know, the hard, like going through tough times and not wanting to drink over it. I don't know. I like right now, for example, like I lost my job last year. I've been struggling to find a new job. It's been 9 months. I'm struggling financially. Like I've been going through a really rough patch in my life right now. But for some reason, every time I remember that I'm sober, I'm like, I don't know why. I get butterflies in my tummy. I'm so grateful for my sobriety that like I wouldn't give it up for, I'm like, oh, at least I'm still sober. It's like literally like this like diamond in my life, and I cherish it so much. And like I wouldn't give it up. Like I'd rather lose all my jobs and I would rather all that other stuff happen than me ever drink again. And I'm really grateful for that, you know?
Yeah, amen to that. I agree with that 100%. And the truth is, right? If you start drinking, it's not going to help any of those things, right? It's not going to make you more employable, right? If
Right.
you're right, and so it's like all of those things. It's like, yeah, at least you know you have a fighting chance today, right? You're at the best that you can be. You don't have that alcohol problem anymore, and you can deal with some of the stuff. There is no question in my life that I would give up a lot of things, but I wouldn't give up my sobriety. And I've had that conversation. I've had that conversation with my wife.
Not even religious, but I was like so freaking desperate. And I remember praying, being like, if you get me sober, I promise I will pay it forward. I promise someday I will pay it forward. And I vowed to hopefully pay forward if I got sober, that I would help other people get sober. I was so desperate at that point. So anyways, fast forward. I'm going to meetings and I'm in service, and I will say that being in service, wow, like it is such a game changer for your recovery. Like you can be sober and not be in service, and that's like I don't think it's like critical to staying sober like necessarily, but I do think it really elevates and brings more joy to your recovery.
Yes.
It helps you get out of self, because like that's the thing, like when you're drinking, it's like so navel gazing, like you're always like so obsessed with drinking and yourself and your problems and yourself and your shame, and it's me and it's me and it's my shame and it's alcohol. So it's so nice to just think about something other than yourself. And I thought that was like such a nice aspect of sobriety. It's like, oh, I finally can get out of self and help other people. And so I did meetings and all of that for a while. And then I ended up getting super busy in around like year 2 of sobriety. I got a new job, all this like really cool stuff started flourishing in my life, obviously all due to my recovery and being sober. But I got so busy, I ended up kind of like falling away from the sober community. And I stopped going to meetings and I just stopped focusing on sobriety, and I just kind of got into my like new life, new job, new hobbies, so fun, new friends, awesome. And it was in 2020. And so what, I'm like, I think like 3 years sober or something like that, maybe 2.5. I remember like everything was closed down. COVID was in full like mode. And I remember being like, oh, you know what I miss is like, I miss sober like communities. Like, I don't know what it was. I was just sitting there and I just like missed it. I don't have a therapist or anything. So it was kind of like the only thing I had for therapy and like, I don't know. And so I decided to try to, and then, we didn't have meetings. So I decided to start like a sobriety Instagram. And then I also started like getting into TikTok, and I was like, what we need more of is like funny videos about sobriety, because sobriety tends to be really heavy. And I felt like there needed to be more levity in this space.
Absolutely.
And so I started making funny TikToks about sobriety, and I started my Instagram. And one of the things I wanted to do on Instagram was like be super real about recovery and talk about stuff that a lot of people won't talk about. So like sex and sobriety and like smoking weed. Like, what do you guys think about this? Like all the like kind of like controversial stuff. I just like wanted to talk about it, but like in a safe space. And so, yeah. And I knew like being super vulnerable, like that's what I wanted, was a really authentic, vulnerable space. And to be quite honest, I didn't think it was going to grow past 11 or 100 followers. I was like, ooh, I wonder if I had 100 followers, like that'd be really big.
Mm-hmm.
But it was 2020. Everybody was struggling with their drinking. And I think honestly, that was a big reason why it grew so fast. TikTok was at its, like, I was an early adopter. So I grew really quickly in TikTok, and that's kind of how it got to be where it is now. And it's honestly been such an amazing like gift in my life. I truly do think Sober Pal helps me stay sober, but not only helps me stay sober, it helps me stay grateful for my sobriety too. And it has been such a wonderful journey being able to meet people through like the retreats and the meetups, and to like now I've made this like sobriety affirmation card deck, which was like a long time dream of mine. And so it's just been like such a joy and a gift to be involved in the recovery community in this way.
This is a bit of a controversial topic because there are traditions around anonymity and anonymity in even social media. I'm also a firm believer that there has to be role models that you can see out there that are living a sober lifestyle, who are having fun and have the things that you want. It can't just be all hidden. And especially after COVID, where we embrace this technology, it's more likely than not people are going to find something about recovery, social media, or some type of technology. There are people out there, there's so many options now. There are Patreon groups that you can find recovery. You can go to Recovery Elevator, which has kind of monetized an AA type program, and you can get sober with something like that and never walk into AA. So you have to have people who you see What are they doing? What are their struggles, warts and all? And maybe I can do this too. So I think it's awesome that you're doing that. Have you gotten any pushback from any old timers?
On TikTok, I have actually.
Really?
Yeah, definitely more on TikTok than on Instagram. Yeah, like on TikTok, if I make a TikTok related to anything related to AA where I mention AA instead of just saying a meeting, like back in the day, I would say like, here I am at an AA meeting. What some of the things I love about AA is like, you'll see people of all types in these meetings. It's not just like frumpy, like old folks who are like smoking cigarettes. Like it's all types. And like it went viral and people were like, oh, you're breaking tradition. And, so the program in my community is actually really progressive. And we've talked about this in my meetings. And the way we look at it is you make the choice about your own anonymity. You just don't out anybody else. And I am super like, I make sure I never out other people. I protect other people's anonymity very much. And I just choose to not to like reveal myself. And so I'm not breaking tradition according to like the way we follow it in my community. But, I can imagine an old timer from a different area where the program kind of operates differently. They would probably frown upon it.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Mr. Old Timer who's got 30 years?
Yeah.
Bullshit.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, it's always one of these things. It all depends on how you feel about it, right? I mean, there are people, Matt and I know these people out there who, they just swear. They swear by the 1930-something language of the big book and all of this stuff. And listen, I'm a firm believer that if Bill Wilson was alive today, he'd be on TikTok and Instagram. He's trying. I'm serious. His whole objective was to try to reach as many alcoholics as possible.
Yeah, Hank would be saying, Bill, YouTube Shorts is a thing now.
Right. So he would be out here trying to get people, right? That was his goal. So I get it, and people have their own way. Listen, I'm a firm believer. If you don't keep moving forward, if you don't embrace technology will just leave you behind. And
I love
like you said,
yeah.
2020, we were all just, we were stuck in our houses, right? So that, being someone young like you, right? Matt did his thing and, getting online, doing the Instagram, doing the TikToks.
I mean, for me, Recovery Elevator was like the only podcast out when I first got sober. It was the only one out there. And it was like the first stepping stone that I took because I was too ashamed. I was way too ashamed to go to a meeting. Are you kidding me? There was no way in hell I was going to a meeting back then. I needed something that I could access from the comfort of my home while I was still too ashamed to step out.
Yep.
So, and that's one of the reasons why I really love Instagram. And I love like what you guys are doing with podcasts. Like we need to make it accessible for people who maybe aren't quite ready to go to a meeting. Right. The more, the merrier. And I just love the idea of Bill, like being on TikTok, like
with that haircut of his too. He wouldn't update the haircut.
Right. Never.
He'd be on like that.
But I'm sure he would. I'm sure he would be. And listen, everybody has their own feeling about it, and we know people, plenty of people on the other side of that. So I don't fault anybody. You get sober the way you get sober.
I got to know Bill Shaberg, who wrote the big giant tome, Writing the Big Book, which is this entire tome that he, for 7 years, researched how the Big Book was written, and he looked over all the original materials. Guy's 78 years old. He's been sober for decades. He's got a YouTube channel. Yeah. This old guy. He does like these YouTube videos and stuff where he's teaching people. And I'm like, you never know with some people that some people are more progressive than others. But Bill wrote a book, as far as I'm concerned, because it was the TikTok of the time. Books are just a medium. Things change, and it was the fastest way to get that message to other people. Tell me a little bit about this Tahoe trip. You're booking a Tahoe trip for sober people.
I am. So that's where I got sober, okay, was in Tahoe, or that's where I went to my first meeting. And it's funny because after I left Tahoe, I resented Tahoe for so long because I was like, you're the reason I became an alcoholic. Like there was just so much resentment around Tahoe and the Peter Pan lifestyle. And I don't know, it was so weird. And every time I went back to Tahoe, I was so triggered because I moved to Reno shortly after I got sober. But so anyways, now I am doing a Lake Tahoe retreat, and it's going to be a retreat for people who are sober, and I'm going to just show them my favorite places in Tahoe, and we're going to vibe and connect and have fun and adventure and just do it sober. And really, like, my goal with this is to show people that you can connect with other people, you can feel adventurous and alive, and you can do it without alcohol. And I did do 2 meetups the last 2 years. I didn't call them retreats because they weren't for profit. We were like meeting up and splitting the cost. This is the first time I'm actually like organizing the whole thing and like all this and that. So I'm calling it a retreat, but it just was so special the last few years to connect and go to nature and have fun together. And so I'm just so excited to be able to do it in my old hometown. And now I'm like in love with Tahoe again. And it's so beautiful and special and magical. So I'm just so excited to host. It's 2 weekends, August 4th through 6th and 11th through 13th. And yeah, and there's like 7 slots per weekend. So they're probably going to go pretty fast. My hope is to eventually like do fun, like summer camp style retreats someday. But it's a good starting point, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So here's the thing as well. If you're thinking of going and you're a creep, she's going to screen you out. There are no creeps allowed at this retreat because there are people here who are getting over addiction, and leave those people alone. There's not going to be any 13 stepping at this retreat. So if you're thinking about that, don't apply.
I'm putting a no creeps allowed button on the landing page. Thanks to you.
Yes. Only solid. But I think this is great because you, again, these things when you're new in sobriety, you need to see that fun is possible.
Right.
This was one of the things that helped me getting sober is I hooked up with people like Steve, and I hooked up with people like John, and we went and did sober, fun things.
Yeah.
And, we were more obnoxious in restaurants than the people who were drinking. And we were just stacking up bottles of Pellegrino, and that's all we were drinking, or Diet Coke. Like we were wiping the bar out of all of their sparkling water, and they didn't understand why we were the most obnoxious people and were sober.
It's so funny. I've had friends and like colleagues see videos from past meetups and retreats and stuff, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, can I come next time? And I'm like laughing because it's like, oh, we're all sober. You know what I mean? It's like, right. You can have such an awesome time and laugh so hard in sobriety. And I agree with you. Like I thought the fun was done when I stopped drinking. I was a party girl. You know what I mean? Yeah. But honestly, I think the party is just beginning when you get sober. And I've had so much fun in sobriety. There are no words. And I just, a lot of people write me and they're so scared because they're like, I'm so bored and this and that. And it's like, trust me, like if you seek it out and you create a life that you love, like you're going to have so much fun, and you're never going to want to go back to alcohol. Like you're like never, ever.
I always say that you need to find that group of people for you, right? And you can find, right. You find the tribe, your posse, whatever you want to call it. Every time that I sponsor a guy or bring, somebody asks me for a little help, I will bring them to my meetings, right? I'll bring them to my meetings. I'll introduce them to my friend, and I'll say, this is how I get and stay sober. These people don't have to be your people. I tell them that, like, they don't have, but you have to find your people. Like, if you don't find your community, then, and you're trying to do this solo without a community, and again, you can find that community online nowadays. You can find it on Instagram. You can find it somewhat on TikTok. You can find it on some of these other, some of the other platforms. But you need a community. You need people to talk to, because what I have found that when I tried to do it on my own, a little bit like you, when I tried to figure out how I get sober and stay sober, and that doesn't mean not drinking, right? That's the other thing. I was able to not drink for a long time, but there was no sobriety in my life, right? I was not a fun person to be around. I needed to know how to live a free and happy life without alcohol. And that took some work. And it took other people to show me how to do that.
Yeah, I tell people too, because, they're like, how long before the cravings have went away? How long before you felt joy again? How long before X? How long before Y? And I'm like, well, tell me how much work you're willing to put in. How much work are you willing to put in? The more work you put in now, the sooner it'll happen for you. Yeah. I had to put in so much work on my recovery. Okay, and that's what I always tell people too. Like, there's a difference, like what you were just alluding to, Steve. Like, I always say there's a difference between sobriety and recovery. And one is not drinking, and one is like truly healing and finding joy and freedom. And, for me, I literally had a sponsor who was like making me do homework, like pen to paper homework.
That's a good sponsor.
Yeah. It's a great sponsor. Yeah. And I had my sponsees doing hella homework too. Like, and I remember being like, oh, homework, grumbling, coming home, like, oh, my four step. And then like I would do the homework and I'd be all pissy. And then I'd have a crazy breakthrough. And I would just be like, oh my God. I had this like one crazy breakthrough. I was on cloud 9 after that. And it was like, that was when I really started to feel a deep change, was by doing the work. And like that deep change is like when the cravings go away. Cause that's when you were like, oh, I don't want to drink anymore. It's not that, it's like, I knew I had to quit drinking, but now I just don't want to drink. I don't want it. I'm in love with my new life. And you would fall in love with the person you become in recovery, someone you can trust, someone you respect, someone who can like go out into the world and be proud of the fact that they don't drink alcohol. Like, and so, yeah, putting in the work, like it was a lot of work, but it was the best work, the wisest investment I've ever made in my entire life.
If you want to find Laura, I'm going to put all the links in the show notes here. You can find her on TikTok and Instagram at Your Sober Pal. I'll also put links to the Tahoe trip. As long as you're not a perv, you're welcome to apply and spend the money to do it. I recommend following Laura. There are real... It's not all fun and, everything is not, sunshine and roses every day on the feed. It's real, just like it's real in real life, which is why I love this feed. And I'm so honored you decided to come on our show tonight. Laura, thank you so much for coming on the Sober Friends podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
And we'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.